Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through stacks of research, historical texts, all that stuff, to give you the essential truths, the surprising connections.
And today we're tackling Genghis Khan.
A figure who's just immense.
Yeah.
So mythologized, so impactful. You could argue he's maybe the most transformative person in Eurasian history.
Definitely. Born Temujin, of course, the founder, the first great Khan of the Mongol Empire. And if you're looking for someone whose legacy forces you to hold contradictory ideas at the same time.
He's your guy.
He is absolutely your guy. Builder of the biggest continuous empire ever, but also, well, the orchestrator of unbelievable destruction.
So our goal here, our mission for you, is to get past that simple image, that sort of barbarian warlord stereotype.
Right.
We want to really dig into the sources, look at his chaotic rise, that political genius that let an orphan unite the entire steppe.
And his campaigns stretching from, well, the Pacific practically to the Caspian Sea.
Plus the legacy, the structures, the politics he left behind. It's complex, it's enduring.
And right away we hit problems, like basic stuff. His name, his title, even when he was born.
Yeah, that uncertainty itself tells you something about the challenge, doesn't it?
It really does.
Okay, let's start with that biographical quicksand, his birth date. Most historians kind of settle on 1162, right?
Around 1162, yeah. But you see 1155, 1167 thrown around too. There's even a suggestion from one historian, Rechnevsky, that Temujin himself might not have known the exact date.
Which tells us, what about the records?
Well, two things, really. First, precise calendar dates just weren't the top priority for nomadic tribes back then.
Okay.
And second, a lot of the biographical details we rely on, they were put together later, sometimes much later, and shaped to fit, an official story. So that fluidity in dates, it reflects that distance between the event and the writing.
And the names, it's like a linguistic maze.
Totally. His birth name, Temujin, you see it spelled Temujin sometimes. The thinking is it might come from a Tatar warrior his father captured, or maybe from the root word Temur, which means iron.
Iron. Okay. And then the big one, Genghis Khan.
Ah, the title. That's a whole puzzle in itself. You see it written Chinggis, Genghis. Genghis.
Wow, the variation.
Different languages romanizing the sounds differently. Mongolian, Chinese, Persian sources, they all heard it slightly differently.
Yeah.
There's even a theory that Genghis, the G spelling we often use, might actually stem from a misreading of Persian texts by European scholars way later, like in the 18th century.
Huh. But the meaning itself is where the ambition really shows.
Exactly. What did Genghis Khan actually mean?
So what are the best theories?
A few contenders. One early idea was maybe he was just avoiding the standard title Gurkhan, which means like Khan of the tribes. His rival Jamuka had already claimed that one.
So he just sidestepped it, made up his own brand.
Kind of, yeah. Shrewd political branding, like you said. Ditch the old title, make a new, unique one, purely about standing out.
Smart.
But the theory that holds more weight now links Genghis to the Turkic word Tengiz, meaning ocean. Yeah, so if Genghis means oceanic, or maybe just implies strength, the whole title, Genghis Khan, could translate to something like universal ruler.
Wow.
Implying his rule should be boundless, like the ocean surrounding the world. This wasn't just about being a local chief. This was global ambition right there in the name.
Sets the stage perfectly. Okay, let's use this confusion, this uncertainty about names and dates, as our way into the sources themselves. Because understanding him means understanding who wrote about him, and crucially, why.
Right. For historians trying to piece together Temujin's life, it's like assembling a mosaic from shattered pieces found all over the place.
You mentioned the languages.
Over a dozen. Mongolian, Chinese, Persian, Armenian, Syriac, you name it. And they're all looking at the Mongols through their own cultural lens, often a hostile one, different politics, different religions.
So where do we start? The key Mongol source seems to be the secret history of the Mongols.
That's the one. It's gold, really, precisely because it wasn't written as later imperial propaganda. It's got the unflattering details.
What kind of detail?
Well, it's attributed maybe to someone in the imperial bodyguard, writing not long after Genghis's death. And this anonymous author was willing to be critical, to recount stuff that was taboo, inconvenient.
Okay.
It tells us about him killing his half-brother, better fratricide. It mentions moments when he was indecisive as a young leader. And crucially, it doesn't shy away from the big, politically toxic question mark over the paternity of his oldest son, Jochi.
Ah, the legitimacy issue.
Exactly. Details that the official histories, written later, just scrubbed out.
Which brings us to those official versions.
Yeah.
Like Rashid al-Din's James al-Tawarik the Compendium of Chronicles.
Right. Rashid al-Din was writing a few generations later under Ilkhan Ghazan, who had converted to Islam.
Yeah.
He had amazing access, privileged access, the confidential Mongol sources like the Altan Debtor, the Golden Book, which is now lost.
So he had the inside scoop.
He did. But because he was writing an official imperial history, he had a job to do, clean up the family story.
How so?
Well, take Jochi's legitimacy. Rashid al-Din completely eliminates any hint of doubt about his paternity. Why? Because the whole legitimacy of the later Khans, including his patron Ghazan, flowed partly through Jochi's line. So that doubt had to go. That's the kind of editing we constantly have to watch out for.
And then you have the outsiders looking in. Totally different perspectives there.
Wildly different. You've got the Persian chronicler Juzjani. He was an eyewitness to the sheer devastation of the Mongol conquests in places like Khorasan.
So, understandably hostile.
Intensely hostile, yeah. And justified from his viewpoint. He basically sees the Mongols as, like, agents of the apocalypse, unprecedented destruction.
But then there's another Persian, Juvayni.
Right, his contemporary Juvayni. He also lived through it, but he ended up getting a high position in the Mongol administration in Persia, the Ilkhanate.
So a different angle.
A very different angle. He's generally accurate on events, but his interpretation is much more sympathetic. He often frames Genghis Khan as this necessary force of order, maybe even divinely sanctioned, who had to sweep away corruption.
So read only Juzjani, you get a monster. Read only Juvayni, you get a pragmatic, if ruthless, state builder.
Exactly. You absolutely have to read them together, triangulate, understand their biases.
Okay, let's dive into that early life. The reality was far from imperial beginnings.
Oh, absolutely. Born into the Borjigin clan. His father, Yasuge, was a chieftain. His mother, Hoyun. Well, Yasuge had abducted her from her first husband, who was from the Merkit tribe. This abduction itself follows a pattern of steppe warfare, but it sets up future conflict.
And Temujin's name. We mentioned iron or the captive Tatar. There's also that birth legend, right? Clutching a blood clot.
Yeah, the secret history mentions that. Born clutching a clot of blood in his fists, supposedly signifying he'd be a great warrior. Classic foreshadowing, likely added later.
But the real turning point, the catastrophe, was his father's death.
Yasuge's death. Temujin was only about 8, maybe 9 years old. His father was traveling, accepted food from some Tatars' traditional hospitality, but these were enemies. They poisoned him.
And that just shattered everything for the family.
Complete disaster. Politically, socially, Temujin was way too young to take over leadership.
So the clan abandoned them.
The powerful Tahird faction, technically related but rivals, saw their chance. They just left Halunin and her young children, took all the followers, the herds, everything.
Wow.
They were cast out, plunged into extreme poverty, reduced to this desperate hunter-gatherer life on the steppe, foraging for roots, nuts, hunting marmots, fish, just trying to survive.
That level of deprivation, it must have forged his character.
Absolutely. It's the crucible, and it's in this desperate state that we see that first glimpse of his ruthlessness emerge, involving his older half-brother, Better.
The conflict over food.
Ostensibly, yeah. Disputes over hunting spoils, like a fish or a bird. But it was deeper than that. It was about who was going to be the leader of this little family unit, the heir to their father's, well, non-existent legacy at that point.
And the outcome.
The sources, especially the secret history, are clear. Temujin and his younger full brother, Khazar, ambushed Better and killed him, shot him with arrows.
Fratricide, a huge taboo in steppe society, breaking kin loyalty.
Massive taboo, which is why the later official chronicles just erase it, pretend it didn't happen.
But the secret history doesn't shy away.
No. It even records Holun, his mother, being furious, reprimanding Temujin and Khazar harshly for killing their own kin. It shows this was controversial, traumatic, even within their tiny, struggling family.
What's amazing, though, is that Better's younger full brother, Ögedei, didn't hold a grudge, did he?
That's the remarkable part. Ögedei not only accepted it, he became one of Temujin's most loyal, high-ranking companions throughout his life. It shows Temujin had this, uncanny ability, even as a teenager, to command loyalty, even from someone he deeply wronged.
He also started building bridges outwards, pragmatic alliances.
Crucial ones. He swore the Endapak, the Blood Brotherhood oath, with Jamuka, another young noble who became a major rival later.
And he reached out to his father's old ally.
Togrul, Khan of the powerful Carrot tribe. Togrul had been Yasuge's Anda. Temujin sought his protection, basically becoming his vassal, reminding Togrul of the old ties. This was vital for survival.
Okay, so he's got a bit of fragile structure now. A powerful protector, a blood brother.
And a wife. He married Berta around age 15, fulfilling an arrangement his father had made years earlier, but that stability was immediately shattered.
The Morkits return.
Exactly. Seeking revenge for Hulin's abduction years before. They raided Temujin's camp, and this time they kidnapped his wife, Berta.
So history repeats itself.
It does. Temujin had to get her back. He went to Togrul, his protector, and Jamuka, his anda. They agreed to help, launched a campaign, defeated the Morkits, rescued Berta.
As she gave birth very soon after being rescued to Jochi.
Very soon. And this is where those source contrasts we talked about become critical again. Temujin accepted Jochi, raised him as his firstborn son. Politically, that was essential.
But the timing.
The timing raised questions. The secret history confirms that this uncertainty about Jochi's paternity lingered. It haunted Jochi his whole life. It became a major source of tension, especially between Jochi and the second son, Ögedei, who apparently brought it up frequently, questioning Jochi's legitimacy.
Which threatened the whole succession plan down the line.
Absolutely. Rashid al-Din, writing later, he had to smooth that over completely, make Jochi unquestionably legitimate. But the original doubt, recorded in the secret history, reveals this deep fault line that ran right through the imperial family, impacting the empire's future long after Genghis was gone.
Okay, so Temujin gets Berta back, but the alliance with Jamuka, that close bond described in the secret history, sleeping under one blanket, it doesn't last.
No, it was doomed, really. They camped together for about a year and a half after rescuing Berta, but their ambitions clashed. Temujin, crucially advised by his mother Holun and wife Berta, started building his own following.
How is he attracting people? What was his pitch?
He was building a reputation, not just as a warrior, but as a fair, reliable, and generous leader. This contrasted sharply with the often arbitrary, self-serving nature of the traditional tribal aristocracy. People were drawn to his charisma, his meritocratic leanings, even early on.
So a different kind of leadership. An ideology almost.
You could call it that. And this new ideology inevitably clashed with the old ways, represented by Jamuka. This led to their first major battle, at Dalan Baljut, around 1187.
And Tilsit.
He lost. Pretty soundly, actually. Later Mongol chronicles, the official ones, try to spin it, make it seem like a draw or even a victory for Temujin. But modern historians generally agree, based on reconciling the sources, that Dalan Baljut was a definite defeat, a significant setback for him.
A setback that might explain the next phase, the so-called hidden years.
Exactly. This defeat is likely the key. There's a strong theory, gaining wide acceptance, that after Dalan Baljut, Temujin essentially vanished from the Mongolian steppe for several years, maybe close to a decade.
Vanished where?
The theory is he spent those years in North China, serving the Jurchen Jin dynasty. Possibly as a subordinate, maybe even in some kind of servitude or as a border guard captain. He likely disappears from Mongol records because he was, well, elsewhere.
And why would the Mongol sources like the secret history omit this?
National prestige. It's a huge historical irony. Genghis Khan's greatest triumph later was overthrowing the Jin dynasty.
Right.
So to admit that their great founder had once been a servant or a subordinate of the very empire he destroyed, that would completely undermine the narrative of inevitable Mongol destiny and supremacy. It had to be suppressed.
But think about what that experience, if true, would have given him.
Oh, it's transformative. If he spent years within the Jin system, he got an education no other steppe nomad could dream of. He saw firsthand how a large, sedentary agrarian state worked. Their bureaucracy, their tax systems, their administration.
And crucially, their technology.
Yeah. Their technology, especially siege warfare, engineering, things the nomads were traditionally weak at. When he re-emerged on the steppe around 1196, he wasn't just a charismatic tribal leader anymore. He understood statecraft. He understood logistics. He probably also came back with significant wealth or resources gained during his service.
So serving his future enemy was basically his imperial apprenticeship, a massive irony.
A profound irony. And when he returns, he starts putting this knowledge to use. He begins systematically dismantling his rivals.
How does he rebuild his position?
Around 1196, he gets a chance. He helps the Jin, his former masters, perhaps attack their enemies, the Tatars. He also helps his old protector, Togrul, reclaim his leadership of the Karaite after Togrul had been temporarily ousted.
Shifting the balance.
Completely. These actions elevate Temujin. He's no longer just Togrul's vassal. He's now a powerful ally, maybe even a de facto equal.
And he's still drawing followers away from Jamuka. What made Jamuka less appealing?
Jamuka's actions after his victory at Dalan Baljut really hurt him. The sources record this horrific act. He supposedly boiled 70 young male captives alive in 70 cauldrons.
Boiling prisoners.
Yeah. Whether it's literal or symbolic, it represents extreme cruelty, even by steppe standards. This kind of brutality alienated people. Important figures like Mongolian, whose family became incredibly influential, defected from Jamukha to Temujin around this time. They saw Temujin, despite his own capacity for ruthlessness, as the more stable, predictable, and ultimately more principled leader.
But Temujin wasn't exactly gentle himself. He had his own moments of calculated cruelty.
Absolutely. We need to be clear about that. The secret history, always critical, notes his actions against the Jurchen tribe, who were related to him but disobedient. He executed their leaders. And then there's the incident where he had a leading Jurchen noble killed by having his back broken in a staged wrestling match.
Why wrestling? Why break his back?
It was a public execution, but breaking the back was controversial. Mongol custom usually dictated that nobles should be executed without spilling blood, strangulation, for example. Breaking the back was seen as degrading. It sent a message. Temujin was willing to defy even established customs to enforce absolute loyalty and submission. He was playing by new rules, his rules.
Okay, so the stage is set for the final showdowns. Rivals are weakening. Temujin is consolidating power.
Right. Around 1201, a coalition of tribes, unhappy with Temujin's rise, got together and elected Jamukha as their Gurkhan, that universal ruler title. Temujin and Togrul, still allies at this point, decisively defeated this coalition.
But that alliance between the two big players, Temujin and Togrul, couldn't last.
No, too much power concentrated. Togrul, apparently influenced by his ambitious son Sengum, started seeing Temujin as a threat. Paranoia set in. In 1203, they tried to ambush Temujin.
Did it work?
Temujin was defeated in the initial clash at a place called Kalakaljd Sands, but he managed a skillful retreat, kept his core forces intact, and this retreat led to something significant.
The Belgiuna Covenant.
Exactly. This is a really key moment ideologically. Temujin and his small band of loyal followers, only about 19 of them initially, maybe growing to a few thousand later, reached the muddy lake or river called Belgiuna. They were exhausted, starving, and there they swore this famous oath.
What was the oath?
It was an oath of mutual loyalty, but the crucial thing was who took it. It was this incredibly diverse group. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, men from 9 different tribes. They weren't bound by blood or clan, only by their personal loyalty to Temujin. He promised them, if I achieve my great work, meaning unifying the Mongols, I will share the sweet and the bitter with you.
Breaking the tribal mold completely.
Absolutely. This was the prototype for his later empire. Loyalty to the leader above all else, meritocracy in action. After Belgiuna, they regrouped. Temujin gathered more forces and then confronted the Kurite decisively at the Jezur Heights later in 1203.
And this time?
This time, Temujin won, crushed the Kurite. Togrul fled, but was killed by some Naiman border guards who didn't recognize him. Temujin then absorbed the Kurite elite into his own structure,
leaving only one major rival standing.
The Naimans. In 1204, Temujin met them at the Battle of Shukirmaut, another decisive victory for Temujin. The Naiman leader was killed. The steppe was now effectively his.
What happened to Jamukha, his old Ögedei, now his rival Gurkhan?
Jamukha's end is interesting. He was betrayed by his own remaining followers who handed him over to Temujin, probably hoping for a reward.
And Temujin rewarded them?
Nope. He had them executed immediately for their disloyalty to their own master. Another clear message. Loyalty is paramount, even loyalty to an enemy.
And Jamukha himself?
The accounts differ. The secret history, perhaps wanting to give the old blood brother some dignity, says Temujin granted him an honorable bloodless death, possibly strangulation, after Jamukha requested it. Other sources suggest a much harsher end, maybe dismemberment. Either way, he was eliminated.
So, by 1206, the unification was complete. The tribal warfare that had defined the steppe for centuries was over. Temujin stood alone.
Exactly. Military victory was one thing, but building a state that would last, that was the next challenge. And the foundation for that was laid at the Great Assembly, the kurultai, held in 1206.
Where was it held?
At the headwaters of the Onan River, a significant place in Mongol tradition, and it was there that Temujin formally adopted his new title, Genghis Khan.
Universal ruler.
Right. But this kurultai wasn't just about a fancy title. It marked the beginning of what historians call a social revolution. Genghis Khan knew the old tribal system based on kinship and clan loyalty was inherently unstable. It bred feuds, fragmentation, rivals challenging the leader. That had to change.
He needed a new basis for loyalty. Not blood, but the state. or rather loyalty to him.
Loyalty to him and through him to the state and the imperial family. He deliberately set out to replace those old tribal affiliations with absolute unconditional loyalty to the Khan and the ruling lineage.
How did he restructure society to achieve that?
He created a new hierarchy. At the very top, the Altan Yuruk, the Golden family, that was himself, his mother Hun, his brothers, his sons. They were sacred, the ruling core.
And below them?
Below them, the Khwarazmian, literally blackbone. This wasn't the old aristocracy, though some were incorporated. It was a new elite composed of loyal companions, successful generals, and the heads of newly prominent families raised up by Genghis himself.
But the real engine of this revolution was the military decimal system, the Minquin system. It seems to have gone way beyond just organizing armies.
Oh, it was fundamental. It restructured the entire society. Every able-bodied man, roughly between 15 and 70, was conscripted. They were organized into units of 10 Arban, 100 Jagun, and 1,000 Minkan.
Standard military organization.
Yes, but here's the key twist. Each military Minkan, the unit of 1,000 soldiers, was supported by a corresponding Minkan of households, civilians. Their lives, the economic output, were directly tied to supporting that military unit. It essentially created this massive, state-controlled military-industrial complex.
Wow. And the most radical part was how he dealt with defeated tribes within this system.
This was the masterstroke for stability. When a tribe was defeated, say, the Tatars, the Merkits, the Kharit, the Naiman, their people weren't just subjugated. They were systematically broken up, dispersed, scattered across hundreds of different Min-quads throughout the empire.
Commanded by
Officers personally loyal only to Genghis Khan, often men he had promoted based on merit, not tribal leaders.
So you could never again have, say, a Tatar uprising, because the Tatars were no longer together in one place.
Precisely. It completely eliminated the possibility of old tribal identities reforming and challenging the center. The Minkan system atomized the old loyalties, and it worked. Even when the empire eventually fractured centuries later, the splits happened along the lines of Genghis's descendants' territories, the khanates, not along the old pre-1206 tribal lines. That foundation was incredibly strong. Descendants of Genghis Khan ruled large parts of Eurasia, largely unchallenged from within those old tribal structures, right up into the 1700s.
And underpinning this was meritocracy, promoting based on skill and loyalty, not just birth.
This was revolutionary for steppe society. He elevated his nokad, those personal companions who'd stuck with him through the hard times, the Baljuna guys. Many were from very humble backgrounds.
Like who?
Well, his top generals included men like Ashalmei and the legendary Subutai. They were supposedly sons of a blacksmith. Mukwali, another top commander, came from a slave lineage. You had a carpenter, a shepherd, herdsman who had warned him of danger. These were the men appointed to the highest ranks, commanding thousands. They owed everything to Genghis Khan, not to some ancient clan privilege. People like Borchu and Mukwali, early loyalists, were given command of the right and left wings of the army, huge honors and responsibilities.
And the absolute elite of this new meritocratic system was his personal bodyguard, the Keshig.
Right. It wasn't just a bodyguard, though. It was expanded dramatically from maybe 1,000 or so to 10,000 men. The Keshig was multifunctional. It served as the Khan's personal household staff. It was the military academy, where the sons of commanders were trained and indoctrinated in loyalty. And crucially, it became the central administrative body for the entire empire, running the government day to day.
So service in the Keshig was a huge deal.
The highest honor. And it had another function. Often, the members of the Keshig were the sons or younger brothers of the regional commanders out in the field. So they were elite troops, yes, but they were also effectively political hostages, ensuring the loyalty of their powerful relatives back home. Very clever system.
Okay, so military, political, social structures are reorganized. What about law? We hear about the Great Yassa.
The Yassa or Yassa. This was his attempt to create a unified legal framework for this new state. It wasn't necessarily a single book of laws like a modern code. The actual text is lost and its nature debated.
But it represented
a set of decrees, principles, and legal precedents established by Genghis Khan. He appointed his adopted stepbrother, Shigi Kotukur, a captured Tatar raised by Hulanun, as the chief judge to administer it. It covered things like theft, adultery, treason, military discipline, even environmental rules like forbidding polluting water sources. Its main goal was to enforce order, discipline, and above all, loyalty to the Khan.
So maybe not a codified book,
Hmm.
but a system of established judicial authority and principles.
Exactly. It provided a common legal foundation for a very diverse empire, functioning as a kind of constitution, establishing the rule of law, at least in theory, under the Khan's authority. Crucially, it was largely secular, separate from any specific religion.
So he's got the military, the society, the law, but there's still the spiritual dimension. He had a rival there too, didn't he? The shaman Kokchu.
Yes, Kokchu, also known as Teb-Tengri, meaning most heavenly or wholly heavenly. He was the son of Munglig, that influential early supporter we mentioned. Kokchu gained immense influence as a powerful shaman.
Claiming to speak for Tengri, the sky god.
Directly. And people believed him. He started using this spiritual authority to meddle in politics, trying to create divisions within the imperial family itself. He particularly targeted Genghis's capable brother, Khazar, trying to undermine him.
A direct challenge to Genghis's authority.
A massive challenge. Genghis Khan, again advised by the politically astute Berte, who saw the danger, couldn't tolerate a rival center of power, especially a spiritual one. He gave his youngest brother, Timur, the task of dealing with Kokchu.
And to move.
Arranged for Kokchu to be accidentally killed. The story goes they broke his back that method again during a supposed wrestling match, then left him in a cart. By eliminating the most powerful shaman, Genghis Khan effectively usurped that position too. He became the ultimate link between the Mongol people and Tengri, the supreme deity.
So by around 1207, 1210, he's consolidated everything.
Yeah.
Military, political, legal, and spiritual authority. The state is built.
The foundation is laid. And now, with the homeland secured and unified, his gaze inevitably turned outwards. Expansion was the next logical step, and it started almost immediately. His son Joshi led a campaign north in 1207 to subjugate the forest tribes of Siberia.
Why Siberia?
Resources, control of the fur trade, grain supplies from the south, and access to gold mines. It secured the northern flank and brought valuable assets into the new empire. The stage was set for the much larger campaigns to come.
First major target, the Western Shia Kingdom, ruled by the Tanguts. Raids started early, but the big push was 1209.
Right. The motives were mixed. There was retaliation. The Shia had sheltered some of his enemies, like Tukul's son. But more importantly, the Mongol economy needed resources after the unification wars. Plunder was essential.
And strategic reasons, too, securing the Silk Road.
Definitely. The Shia controlled a key section of the trade routes. Subjugating them meant securing that flank and gaining access to that wealth. So in 1209, Genghis led a full-scale invasion himself.
And this is where they hit a wall, literally. Siege warfare.
Yes, it was a real learning curve. The Mongols were masters of mobile warfare on the plains, but taking heavily fortified cities, they just didn't have the experience or the specialized equipment yet. Their siege techniques were initially pretty basic, crude battering rams trying to blockade cities.
Which led to that famous blunder, the Yellow River incident.
Ah, yes. Near the Shia capital, Zhongsing, Genghis Khan had this ambitious idea to, divert the Yellow River to flood the city into submission.
Bold plan.
Bold but flawed execution. The engineering wasn't up to scratch. The dikes and channels they built were inadequate, they broke, and instead of flooding the city...
They flooded their own camp.
Exactly, a major flood, forcing a humiliating retreat. An emperor flooding his own army, not a great look.
A valuable lesson learned.
A critical one. He realized he needed expertise he didn't have. He quickly made peace with the Western Shia. They formally submitted, paid tribute, even gave the emperor's daughter Chaka as a wife to Genghis in return for the Mongols withdrawing. But the lesson about needing siege technology stuck.
And that lesson would be applied very quickly against the next much bigger target, the Jin dynasty in North China, starting in 1211.
This war felt different. It was more personal, more driven by vengeance.
Why vengeance?
Genghis deeply disliked the Jin emperor, Wanyan Yongji, who had apparently treated him dismissively years earlier when Temujin might have been in Jin service. There is also the memory of Ögedei Khan, an earlier Mongol leader and relative of Genghis, who had been betrayed and executed horribly by the Jin decades before. That was a debt to be paid.
So revenge plus the obvious goal of massive plunder.
Massive plunder, yes. The Jin Empire was huge and wealthy. The Mongols were heavily outnumbered, maybe 8-1 on paper, but the Jin state was internally weak, corrupt, and facing rebellions.
How did the invasion start?
They got a lucky break. The Ögedei tribe, who guarded a key part of the Great Wall for the Jin, were ethnically related to the Mongols and decided to switch sides, letting Genghis Khan's army pour through the defenses.
The Jin defenses just crumbled.
Pretty much. The Jin armies were large but poorly led and lacked coordination. The Mongols won several key field battles. However, the campaign stalled briefly in 1212. Genghis himself was wounded by an arrow while besieging the western Jin capital, Xijing. He had to withdraw to recover.
Another setback in siege warfare. Was this the final straw?
This seems to have been the trigger for that major strategic shift we talked about. After this failure at Xijing, Genghis Khan formally established a dedicated corps of siege engineers. He actively recruited captured Jin experts, hundreds of them. Carpenters, stonemasons, specialists in siege engines like catapults and trebuchets.
So institutionalizing technological adaptation,
Right.
learning from the enemy.
Exactly. Turning the Mongol army from a pure cavalry force into a combined arms military capable of taking down the biggest cities. This change was absolutely crucial for everything that came after.
And it paid off relatively quickly with the fall of the main Jin capital, Zhongdu, modern Beijing.
Right. By 1214, the situation was dire for the Jin. They signed a humiliating peace treaty, giving massive tribute. But then the Jin emperor, Xuanzong, made a fatal error. He moved his court south from Zhongdu to Kaifeng.
Genghis saw that as breaking the treaty.
He interpreted it as a sign of bad faith, an intention to regroup and resist. So he renewed the war. His general, Jibi, used cunning tactics to take the strategic Juyang Pass north of Zhongdu. The city was besieged again, and this time with their new siege expertise, the Mongols couldn't be stopped. Zhongdu fell in May 1215.
And the sack.
Brutal. Fires raged for a month, according to some accounts, massive slaughter and looting. Genghis, however, didn't stay. He left his top general Mukwali in charge of mopping up the rest of North China, a task that took years, and turned his own attention westward.
Towards Central Asia, which first meant dealing with the Kurultai.
Yes, the Kurultai kingdom lay between Mongolia and the next big power, the Khwarazmian Empire. It was ruled by an usurper named Kushlug, a Naiman prince who had fled from Genghis years earlier. Kushlug was unpopular, persecuting the local Muslim majority.
So an opportunity for the Mongols.
A perfect opportunity. Genghis sent his general Jebi the Arrow in 1218. Jebi didn't just invade, he used smart propaganda. He proclaimed religious tolerance, positioning the Mongols as liberators from the oppressive Kushlug.
And it worked.
Brilliantly. The local population turned against Kushlug, who fled. He was eventually caught and executed, his head paraded around. The Kurultai territory was annexed swiftly, bringing the Mongol Empire right up to the borders of the huge, wealthy, but politically unstable Khwarazmian Empire.
And this leads directly to the incident that triggered arguably the most destructive campaign of all. The Otrar incident.
The flashpoint. A huge Mongol trade caravan arrived at the Khwarazmian border city of Otrar. About 450 merchants, mostly Muslim, carrying valuable goods. Crucially, members of the Mongol elite, the Altan Uruk, had invested heavily in this caravan.
So high stakes.
Very high stakes. But the governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, who was related to the Khwarazmian Shah's mother, accused the merchants of being spies. He seized the caravan and massacred almost everyone.
Based on
Possibly paranoia, possibly greed, possibly local politics, whatever the reason, it was a catastrophic mistake.
how did Genghis react?
Initially, he tried diplomacy. He sent envoys, one Muslim, two Mongols, to the Khwarazmian ruler, Shah Muhammad II, demanding that Governor Inalchuk be handed over for punishment.
A reasonable request, arguably.
Maybe, but Shah Muhammad made his second catastrophic mistake. Instead of negotiating, he did the unthinkable. He killed the chief Muslim envoy and shaved off the beards of the two Mongol companions, sending them back humiliated.
Killing an ambassador, the ultimate insult.
The ultimate provocation in steppe culture, and pretty much universally. Violating diplomatic immunity like that was unforgivable. It enraged Genghis Khan. Any thought of a peaceful resolution was gone. This was now about vengeance, about achi koryokoi, evil for evil.
So the invasion of 1219 wasn't just conquest, it was punishment on a grand scale.
Absolutely, and Shah Muhammad made yet another disastrous strategic error. He ruled a vast empire, but it was politically fragmented, his Turkic troops often unruly and disloyal to him personally. Instead of concentrating his forces to meet the Mongols in a decisive battle, which might have been his only chance, he dispersed his armies into large garrisons in the major cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Otrar itself.
Playing into Mongol strengths.
Perfectly. It allowed the Mongols, with their superior mobility and newfound siege skills, to isolate and destroy the Khwarazmian armies piecemeal.
How did the campaign unfold?
Swiftly and brutally. Otrar fell first in 1220. Inalchuk was reportedly executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. Genghis used brilliant maneuvers, like leading a force personally across the supposedly impassable Kizilkum Desert to appear unexpectedly before Bukhara, which surrendered quickly. Samarkand, the capital, fell soon after.
And Shah Muhammad.
He fled. He just ran westward, abandoning his empire. Genghis dispatched his top generals, Jeb and Subutai, with about 20,000 men, with orders to hunt him down relentlessly. They chased him across Persia.
Did they catch him?
No. Muhammad eventually ended up on a small island in the Caspian Sea, where he died miserably of pleurisy or dysentery in the winter of 1220-1221. A pathetic end for the ruler of such a vast empire.
While he was being chased, what was happening in the core Khwarazmian lands, like Khorasan?
That's where the real devastation occurred. Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tului, was given command of the main Mongol army, tasked with subjugating the region of Khorasan, eastern Persia, and modern Afghanistan. And he did it with terrifying efficiency and brutality.
Cities like Nishapur, Merv, Herat.
3 of the largest, wealthiest, most cultured cities in the world at that time. They all resisted, and they were all systematically annihilated. Merv was supposedly subjected to a massacre lasting days. Nishapur's destruction was legendary. Accounts claim every living thing, down to cats and dogs, was killed. Herat suffered a similar fate after initially surrendering and then rebelling.
The death tolls recorded by contemporary historians are just staggering.
They are. Jujani and others claim numbers like 1.7 million killed at Nishapur, 2.4 million at Herat, 1.3 million at Merv. That's over 5 million from just those 3 cities.
Are those numbers credible?
Almost certainly exaggerated. These chroniclers were writing to emphasize the apocalyptic scale of the disaster. But modern historians, trying to be more conservative, still estimate the total death toll for the entire Khwarazmian campaign across Central Asia could easily have been around 1.25 million people. Even at that level, it represents a demographic catastrophe on an almost unimaginable scale. The intent wasn't just conquest, it was terror, ensuring no future resistance.
While Tului was devastating Khorasan, what about Jebi and Subutai after the Shah died? Did they just go home?
No, this is where they embarked on what became known as the Great Raid. It was an incredible feat of arms, one of the greatest cavalry expeditions in history.
What raid did they do?
For about 4 years, from 1220 to 112, 1200, 224, their relatively small force of maybe 2 tumans, 20,000 horsemen, conducted this enormous reconnaissance in force. They swung west, raided northern Persia, then crossed the Caucasus Mountains, defeating the Kingdom of Georgia.
Into Europe.
Into the lands of the Russes. They entered the steppes north of the Black Sea, encountered the Kipchak nomads, Cumans, and the principalities of Kievan Russes. In 1223, at the Battle of the Kalka River, they utterly crushed a combined army of Ros's princes and Kipchaks.
What was the purpose of this great raid? It wasn't conquest, right?
Not permanent conquest, no. It was primarily reconnaissance, gathering intelligence about the lands, peoples, and military capabilities of Eastern Europe. It secured the western flank of the new Mongol territories in Central Asia. And crucially, it provided the strategic information that would be vital for the massive Mongol invasions of Russia and Europe that happened under Genghis's successors, Ögedei and Batu, a decade or so later. It was reconnaissance paving the way for future conquest.
Okay, so we've seen the conqueror, the state builder. What about the man himself? What was Genghis Khan actually like? Any reliable descriptions?
Frustratingly, no contemporary confirmed eyewitness physical description survives. The earliest descriptions come from chroniclers writing decades later, like the Persian Jujani or Rashid al-Din. They generally describe him as tall, physically strong, robust, with a broad forehead and chin, maybe reddish hair, and distinctive cat's eyes, possibly meaning gray or green eyes. But these are secondhand at best.
What about his character, his values? The sources must give us clues there.
They do, and one value stands out above all others: loyalty. That harsh upbringing, the betrayals he suffered, it forged in him an absolute premium on mutual fidelity. Loyalty wasn't just a virtue, it was the bedrock of the entire nation he built.
And he rewarded that loyalty.
Generously. We mentioned the Baljuna covenant promise, sharing the sweet and bitter. He followed through. He broke with steppe tradition by dividing plunder more equally among his soldiers, not just hoarding it for himself and the elite. He even set up a system, recorded in the secret history, to provide for the widows and orphans of his fallen Nurkud companions, ensuring they received shares of cloth and food. It was about creating a bond, buying loyalty, but also institutionalizing mutual support.
He also seems remarkably open-minded for an absolute ruler. Adaptable.
Very much so. He apparently disliked excessive luxury himself. Sources say he welcomed frank advice and even criticism, which is rare for someone with his power. He was intensely pragmatic.
Like adopting the Uyghur script.
Exactly. He saw the need for a written language for administration and had the Uyghur script adapted for Mongolian. He constantly sought out and employed specialists from conquered peoples, Chinese administrators, Muslim merchants and financiers, siege engineers from Persia and China. He understood he didn't know everything and actively sought knowledge, especially about sophisticated technology and governance from the societies he overcame.
But this pragmatism was intertwined with a powerful belief system, wasn't it? His sense of destiny.
That became increasingly central. He came to genuinely believe that Tengri, the eternal blue sky, the supreme deity of the Mongols, had personally given him a divine mandate to conquer the entire world.
Imbued with Su, divine grace.
Yes, that Su or divine fortune. This belief was incredibly powerful. It justified everything. Anyone who opposed him wasn't just opposing Genghis Khan, they were opposing the will of heaven itself. This allowed him to rationalize acts that might otherwise seem hypocritical, like killing his blood brother Jamuka or launching devastating wars. They were necessary steps in fulfilling his divine destiny.
And it fed into that principle of vengeance we discussed. Achikariulko.
Good for good, evil for evil. It's a principle of reciprocity. Show him loyalty, like Borchu or Jelme, and he rewards you beyond measure. Show him defiance or treachery, like the Khwarazmians or the Western Shia at the end, and the vengeance would be absolute, terrifying. The destruction of the Khwarazmian Empire was the ultimate example of Achikariulkwa on a state level.
Which brings us to his final campaign starting in 1226. He turned back to the Western Shia. Why?
Unfinished business and perceived disloyalty. The Western Shia had submitted back in 1210, but they had refused to provide troops for the Khwarazmian campaign in 1219. That was seen as a major betrayal, a violation of their vassal status. There might have been other provocations involving his general Mukwali, too. For Genghis, this refusal was intolerable. It had to be punished.
And this campaign was different, more punitive.
It seems so. It was almost a war of annihilation from the start. Genghis ordered the cities along the Gansu corridor to be taken and sacked one by one. Resistance was met with massacre. Clemency seems to have been granted much more rarely than in some earlier campaigns.
It was during this campaign, specifically the long siege of the Shika capital Zongxing, that his health failed.
Yes. Sometime in late 1226 or early 1227, he had a fall from his horse while hunting, which seems to have aggravated an underlying illness or caused internal injuries. He became increasingly sick over the following months, running a high fever. But he insisted the siege of Zongxing continue. He died in August 1227 near the besieged city.
What did he actually die of? The accounts vary wildly.
They really do. The most straightforward and likely explanation, given the fall and subsequent fever, is probably complications from the injury or perhaps an infectious disease common on campaign malaria, typhus, maybe even plague. But the sources offer more dramatic possibilities.
Like Marco Polo's version.
Marco Polo, writing much later, claimed he died from an infected arrow wound. The papal envoy Carpini heard a story about him being struck by lightning.
And the most famous, lurid legend.
That involves the captured Western Shia queen or princess, Gerbelchin. The legend claims she was forced into his bed, hit a dagger, and castrated or fatally wounded him during the encounter before possibly killing herself. It's a dramatic story, popular in folklore, but historians consider it highly unlikely. Probably a later invention reflecting the conquered people's desire for revenge.
Regardless of the cause, his death was kept secret initially.
A profound secret. His inner circle concealed it from the army until after Zongxing finally fell, which happened the following month, September 1227. They didn't want morale to collapse during the final stages of the siege.
And the treatment of Zongxing after its fall.
Reflecting Genghis's final orders, apparently it was brutal, extreme savagery. The Tangut population was systematically wiped out. The historian John Mann calls it a very successful ethnocide. The Western Shia kingdom effectively ceased to exist as a distinct cultural entity.
His body was then taken back to Mongolia for burial.
Yes, transported in secret back to his homeland. Buried, according to tradition, near the sacred mountain Burkhan Khaldun, his birthplace. The exact location was kept secret, guarded fiercely. The area was declared Ikkorig, the great taboo, forbidden to outsiders for centuries, adding to the mystique.
His death immediately raised the critical issue. Succession. Always a weak point for nomadic empires.
A huge problem. Traditional Mongol custom often favored ultimogeniture, the youngest son inheriting the home hearth, but that didn't automatically apply to titles or overall rule. Genghis knew this could tear his empire apart, so he had actually addressed the succession before his final campaign.
And the choice was between his 4 sons by his principal wife, Berte.
Yes. Jochi the eldest, but there was always that shadow over his legitimacy. Plus, he seems to have become somewhat estranged from his father, more focused on his own assigned territory, appanage, in the west. Conveniently, or perhaps not, Jochi actually died from an illness a few months before Genghis did, so he was out of the running anyway.
Okay, so that leaves 3. Ögedei.
Ögedei, the second son. Known for being strict, knowledgeable about Mongol law, Yassa, but also seen as harsh, uncompromising, maybe arrogant. Not necessarily the best temperament to hold a diverse empire together through diplomacy.
Tului, the youngest.
Tului was probably the most capable military commander of the Four Company. His campaign in Khorasan proved that. He was popular with the army, but he was the youngest and perhaps seen as too focused on military matters. Also, his incredibly capable wife, Sorgatani Beki, was a Nestorian Christian, a patron of many religions. Maybe some worried Tului wouldn't preserve the core Mongol traditions as fiercely.
Which left Ögedei, the third son.
Ögedei. He was the one Genghis ultimately chose as his successor before he died. Why Ögedei? He wasn't the military genius Tului was, nor the legal expert Ögedei was. He was known to enjoy drinking, perhaps too much. But he had the right temperament. He was seen as generous, amiable, well-liked by the commanders and his brothers. Crucially, he was seen as someone who could compromise, listen to advice, and trust the capable subordinates his father had put in place. In a newly forged empire held together by personal loyalty and fragile institutions, those qualities were deemed essential for stability.
So, after Genghis died, Tului acted as regent for a time.
Yes, Tului served as regent for about 2 years, from 1227 to 1229. He managed the transition, established precedents like halting military campaigns for a mourning period. Then, in 1229, a kurultai was held, and Ögedei was formally enthroned as the second Great Khan, according to his father's wishes.
And we shouldn't forget the daughters. Berte had 5 daughters who also played key roles.
Absolutely. While the 4 sons' appanages eventually evolved into the major successor, khanates, the Golden Horde, Jochi's line, the Chagatai Khanate, the Ilkhanate, Tului's line in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty, Tului's line via Kublai in China. The daughters were vital political instruments during Genghis's lifetime. They were strategically married off to the leaders of important allied tribes, like the Ongjarat, Berti's own tribe, the Akiras, the Ongud. These marriage alliances cemented loyalty and integrated key groups into the imperial structure through blood ties. Berti's children, sons and daughters, were the cornerstones of the empire's continuation.
So, when we try to sum up Genghis Khan's legacy, we keep coming back to that fundamental paradox, the builder and the destroyer.
You have to hold both ideas at once. On the one hand, the sheer scale of the death and destruction, the multi-generational trauma inflicted on settled civilizations across Eurasia, China, Persia, Central Asia, the Russ's lands, it's undeniable and horrific.
But on the other hand, the achievements were equally monumental.
Absolutely. He took a collection of warring nomadic tribes and forged them into a unified nation. He founded the largest contiguous land empire in human history. That alone is staggering.
And the consequences of that empire? The Pax Mongolica.
That's arguably his most significant positive legacy. For roughly a century, the Mongol Empire enforced peace and security across a vast swath of Eurasia. This allowed for unprecedented levels of trade and travel along the Silk Road. Ideas, technologies, goods. Marco Polo's journey is just the most famous example moved across continents with a speed and safety unimaginable before or for centuries after. Standardized weights, measures, maybe even rudimentary passports.
Yeah.
It connected the world in a new way.
He also left behind that structure of governance, the legal system, the administration.
Even if the Great Yassa wasn't a single written code, he established the principle of centralized judicial authority under Shigi Kwotukwo. He created administrative structures borrowed from conquered peoples that provided a framework for his successors to rule vast, diverse populations. The idea of a state governed by law, however imperfectly applied, was a key legacy.
But his greatest failing seems directly tied to Mongol tradition itself, the succession.
That's the consensus, yeah. His inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to break completely with the tradition of dividing territory among sons meant the empire was destined to fragment. Granting huge appanages to Jochi, Chagatai, Ögedei, and Tului inevitably led to their descendants prioritizing their own local interests over the unity of the whole empire. Within a couple of generations, those appanages became functionally independent khanates. The Golden Horde, the Chagatai Khanate, the Ilkhanate, the Yuan dynasty. The dream of a single, unified world empire died with him, or soon after.
How is he viewed today around the world? Let's start with Mongolia itself.
In modern Mongolia, the view is overwhelmingly positive. He's far more than just a historical figure. Historically, he even became integrated into religious practice, seen almost as a deity in some folk traditions, connected genealogically to Buddhist figures after the Mongols converted to Tibetan Buddhism.
And in secular terms.
He is the undisputed founding father of the nation. Modern Mongolians tend to downplay the conquest and brutality, often framing it as just how things were done back then, and focus intensely on his positive legacy.
Like what?
His unification of the tribes, ending internal warfare, his establishment of a written language, law, and state structures, his use of the kurultai as a consultative assembly. They see these as the foundations of Mongolian statehood, even connecting them to modern democracy. His image is everywhere on the currency, the togrug. The main international airport in Ulaanbaatar is named Chinggis Khan International, and that colossal equestrian statue at Sanjan Bulldog is a major national symbol. He is Mongolia.
Now contrast that with the Muslim world, which bore the brunt of the initial invasions.
A much more complex and often negative view, naturally. Initially, as we saw with Stujani, the Mongols were seen as a scourge, almost divine punishment, the harbingers of Judgment Day. Non-Muslim rule over ancient Islamic lands was unprecedented and traumatic.
Did that view ever change?
Somewhat. Later, especially after Mongol rulers in Persia, the Ilkhans, and the Golden Horde converted to Islam, some Muslim chroniclers began to reinterpret Genghis Khan. Maybe he wasn't the Antichrist, but an instrument of God's will sent to punish the corruption of the previous Muslim rulers like the Khwarazmian Shah.
But in modern times, particularly with Arab nationalism.
The perception often shifts back to overwhelmingly negative. He's frequently portrayed as the accursed enemy, the quintessential barbarian savage. His invasions are seen as the beginning of a catastrophe that culminated in his grandson Hulagu's sack of Baghdad in 1258, considered a foundational trauma for Arab and Islamic civilization.
What about Russia, the Tatar yoke?
Extremely negative historical memory there, too. The centuries of Golden Horde dominance are traditionally portrayed as a period of oppression, destruction, and backwardness that held Russia back from European development, isolated it, and arguably contributed to later autocratic tendencies. The word yoke itself tells you the perspective.
China is interesting. He conquered them, but the view is different.
Very different, and it's shifted over time. His grandson, Kublai Khan, founded the Yuan dynasty, which ruled all of China. So under the Yuan, Genghis was revered as the dynasty's founder. Later, the Manchu Qing dynasty, also outsiders who conquered China, deliberately positioned themselves as heirs to the Mongol legacy to legitimize their own rule.
What about in the 20th century?
Chinese nationalists initially saw him, quite reasonably, as a foreign conqueror, a symbol of national humiliation. But in recent decades, especially as the Chinese state emphasizes a multi-ethnic narrative of national history that includes the Yuan dynasty as fully Chinese, Genghis Khan has been largely rehabilitated. He's often presented quite positively now as a great Chinese historical figure, a unifier.
And finally, the West. Europe only experienced the Mongols indirectly at first.
Western views have fluctuated wildly. In the 14th century, with increased contact via the Pax Mongolica, some Europeans saw the Mongol Khans, especially Kublai, as potentially powerful allies against Islam, sometimes even portraying Genghis as a just and wise ruler. But by the Enlightenment in the 18th century, he became the archetype of the Oriental despot, tyrannical and cruel.
And now?
Now, Western scholarship generally aims for a more nuanced assessment, acknowledging the immense brutality and destruction, but also recognizing the political genius, the administrative innovations, the creation of that vast interconnected world, and the long-term consequences, both positive and negative, trying to see the whole picture.
So this deep dive really underscores that complexity. To understand Genghis Khan, you can't just pick one narrative.
You absolutely can't. You have to hold the ruthless conqueror who caused unimaginable suffering alongside the visionary state builder who created structures that lasted centuries and connected continents. The sources themselves force you into that uncomfortable, contradictory space.
He was a product of incredible hardship, valued loyalty fiercely, promoted commoners based on merit.
Yet he executed his own blood brother, rationalized mass slaughter through divine mandate, and built an empire fueled by vengeance as much as vision. Pragmatism and belief were fused in a really potent, often terrifying way.
It seems like everything comes back to that social revolution of 1206, breaking the tribes, demanding loyalty only to him and the state.
That reorganization, the Minkin system, was designed for one purpose: Stability through centralized personal loyalty. Eliminate the old identities, eliminate the old threats.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Consider this. Was Genghis Khan's greatest strength that policy of destroying tribal loyalties to ensure absolute loyalty to the state and the ruling family, also the seed of the empire's eventual weakness after he was gone?
By eradicating those older, deeply rooted kinship structures that had provided social cohesion, however fractious, did he leave his vast empire entirely dependent on the personal qualities, the diplomatic skills, the sheer force of will of his immediate successors? Instead of building on a unified national identity that could survive weak leadership, did he create a system that could only function under exceptional rulers like himself, making fragmentation almost inevitable once average human beings took charge?